I still remember the exact moment my stomach dropped. Like the ground had opened beneath me and I was falling endlessly into nothing. It was a Saturday morning in late October. Crisp air with that faint smell of wet leaves and pumpkin spice lattes drifting through the neighborhood. The kind of morning that should have felt cozy, like wrapping yourself in a blanket. But instead, it was the moment my world started to unravel. I had my phone in my hand, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and on the screen was the hotel confirmation email. The very same boutique hotel in Asheville I had secretly booked for us 2 weeks earlier. Only this booking wasn't mine. It was hers, and the name listed under guest one wasn't me. That image has been burned into my brain like a scar. I can close my eyes and still see the hotel's logo, that fancy cursive script with a little pine tree next to it, and beneath it my girlfriend's name, Samantha Rhodes. Only this time, paired with the name of the man I'd never met but had always suspected was lingering somewhere just beyond the edge of our conversations. Michael. But before I spiral too fast into that nightmarish moment, I need to back up. Because stories like this don't start with a bomb dropping. They build slowly, with tiny cracks that you convince yourself aren't there. I want to tell you how I got to that point. How I spent years weaving my life around someone I thought I knew. How I convinced myself the small lies weren't really lies. And how I ignored that gnawing feeling in my gut until it was too late. My name's Daniel, though most people just call me Dan. I'm 31 now. But back when all this happened, I was 29 and working as a graphic designer for a small marketing agency in Charlotte, North Carolina. Not exactly glamorous, but I loved it. It gave me enough money to pay rent, stash a little away, and plan trips with Sam, who at that point had been my girlfriend for just over 3 years. We met in 2017, at a mutual friend's housewarming party in Raleigh. It was one of those awkward nights where half the people were standing around sipping cheap beer, and the other half were glued to their phones pretending they weren't bored. And then Sam walked in, and I swear the entire energy of the room shifted. She had this laugh that carried over the music, this sort of magnetic way of pulling people in without even trying. I noticed her within seconds, and by the end of the night I had her number. For the first couple of years it was good. Better than good, actually. We did all the things young couples do. Road trips to the beach, Sunday mornings at the farmer's market, binge-watching Stranger Things when it first dropped. We had our fights, sure, but nothing major. At least, that's what I told myself. Looking back, there were patterns. Nights when she'd suddenly have to work late, even though she'd been ranting about how slow things were at her job. Weekends when she'd say she was visiting her cousin but would come back with a tan line that didn't match North Carolina's fall weather. I ignored it all, partly because I didn't want to be the jealous boyfriend, but mostly because I was in love. Blindly, stupidly, deeply in love. By the time 2019 rolled around, I was already thinking about proposing. I had this whole plan in my head, something big, something romantic, maybe during a trip to New York in the winter, skating at Rockefeller Center with the lights around us. I'd even started casually looking at rings, scrolling through James Allen late at night when she was asleep next to me. I imagined the life we'd build together. A little house, maybe kids, maybe a dog. You know, the usual dream. But then 2020 hit, and the world turned upside down. COVID lockdowns, working from home, endless days blending into nights. It should have brought us closer. For a while it did. We'd cook together, try our hand at baking bread like every other millennial, sit on the couch with glasses of wine and talk about what we'd do when things went back to normal. But there were cracks. Times when she'd disappear into the bedroom for an hour with her laptop, claiming she had Zoom calls but locking the door behind her. Nights when she'd turn her phone face down on the coffee table, something she'd never done before. I felt it in my bones that something wasn't right. But every time I tried to bring it up, she'd brush me off with a smile, or worse, get defensive. And I'd back down, convincing myself I was just paranoid, that the stress of the pandemic was making me overthink. Fast forward to the fall of 2021. Things had opened back up. Life was finding a new rhythm. I wanted to do something special for us, something that reminded us of who we were before everything got complicated. Sam loved the mountains. She'd light up whenever we drove through the Blue Ridge Parkway, pointing out little cabins and imagining staying there for a weekend. So I decided to surprise her. I booked a weekend getaway at this boutique hotel in Asheville I'd read about online. The kind of place with rustic wood beams, a rooftop bar, and views of the mountains that looked straight out of a postcard. I remember how excited I was. I pictured her face when I told her, how she'd throw her arms around me, how maybe this would be the moment that brought us back together, closer than ever. I even bought a new flannel shirt for the trip, telling myself I'd look good in the mountain photos. That's why, When I saw that email pop up on my phone that morning, it felt like the cruelest kind of irony. The subject line was simple: your upcoming stay at the Pines Boutique Hotel. For a split second, I thought it was just my confirmation email again. But then I noticed the date. It had been sent to her email, not mine, and forwarded by accident to our shared account we used for bills. And when I opened it, there it was. Her name, his name. Their room reservation, for the exact same weekend I had booked. I don't even know how long I sat there staring at the screen. My coffee went cold beside me. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. A part of me wanted to believe it was a mistake. Maybe she'd booked it for us too, and just used his name for some reason I couldn't understand. But deep down, I knew. All those late nights, all those locked doors, all those gut feelings I had shoved down, they all came rushing back like a flood. In that moment, I realized the life I thought I was building wasn't real. It was a facade, a carefully maintained illusion, and I had been the fool applauding the magic trick without realizing how it was done. I wish I could say I confronted her right then and there, that I demanded the truth. But I didn't. I froze. I went numb. And in that numbness, I started replaying every memory, every smile, every "I love you," wondering which ones had been lies. It's strange how betrayal feels physical. My chest ached, my throat tightened, my stomach churned. It wasn't just emotional. It was like my body was rejecting the truth, like poison running through my veins. That was the beginning of the end. Though I didn't know just how far the rabbit hole would go, or how much it would change me. After I saw that email, I lived in a fog for a few days. I didn't bring it up right away. That sounds weak, I know. A stronger person would have stormed into the living room and demanded answers. But me, I was terrified of the confirmation, because once the truth is spoken aloud, there's no going back. So instead, I went through the motions like a ghost haunting my own life. I still went to work, sat in front of my computer designing ad layouts for clients I didn't care about, nodding along in Zoom meetings while my head buzzed with a single question. Why him? I still ate dinner with Sam at night, watching her laugh at TikToks on her phone while I wondered if she was texting him under the table. I still crawled into bed beside her, pretending to sleep while my mind raced. But silence only lasts so long before it eats you alive. By Wednesday, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided I'd confront her, not with yelling or accusations, but with the facts. My plan was simple. Print out both reservations, mine and hers, lay them side by side on the kitchen table, and ask her to explain. But life, as always, had other plans. When Friday rolled around, I drove to Asheville alone. I don't know what compelled me to go. Maybe part of me wanted to catch her in the act, to see it with my own eyes so I could finally stop gaslighting myself. Maybe part of me hoped she wouldn't actually show, that the universe would prove me wrong and this whole nightmare would dissolve. Either way, I found myself on I-40, the mountains rising in the distance, a storm cloud of dread hanging over me. The Pines Boutique Hotel was even more beautiful in person than it looked online. Warm golden lights against rustic wood beams, the smell of cedar and fireplaces in the air. It should have been romantic, the perfect setting for the weekend I had envisioned. Instead, I walked into the lobby with my heart pounding, scanning every corner like I was on some sick scavenger hunt. I checked in under my own reservation. The clerk handed me a key card with a practiced smile, oblivious to the war raging inside me. I rode the elevator up to my room, but I couldn't stay there. I paced. I sat on the edge of the bed, bouncing my leg, checking the clock every 2 minutes. My chest felt tight, like I was waiting for a car crash I couldn't stop. And then it happened. Around 6:30 p.m., the lobby doors slid open, and there she was, Sam. Her auburn hair curled the way she always styled it for nights out, her favorite leather jacket hugging her shoulders. She looked stunning, like the woman I had fallen in love with years ago. Only she wasn't alone. Beside her was a tall guy, mid-30s maybe, with that confident posture of someone who thinks the world owes him nothing because it's already his. Dark hair, sharp jawline, tailored coat that screamed money. He carried himself like someone used to being admired. And Sam? She laughed at something he said, reaching out to touch his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. My stomach twisted so violently, I thought I might throw up right there in the hallway. I ducked back, my pulse in my throat, watching them from behind a pillar like a coward. They approached the front desk, smiling, checking in under her reservation. I heard her voice, my Sam's voice, sweet and light as she confirmed their details. And then the dagger. She leaned in close to him, whispering something that made him chuckle, and he kissed her on the temple. A casual, intimate gesture, the kind of thing that isn't done unless it's been done 100 times before. I can't explain the cocktail of emotions that hit me in that instant. Rage, heartbreak, disbelief, humiliation, all of it swirling together until I felt like I might burst. My hands shook so badly I had to clench them into fists. My vision blurred, not just from tears but from the sheer overload of my brain trying to process what I was seeing. I wanted to storm over, to scream, to demand how she could do this after everything. But I froze. Instead, I followed them at a distance, like some pathetic shadow, watching as they took the elevator up. When the doors closed behind them, I sank against the wall, my knees weak. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually I dragged myself back to my room. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I couldn't sit still. I paced. I muttered to myself. I tried to rationalize the irrational. Maybe this was some weird misunderstanding. Maybe they were co-workers, but no. The way she looked at him wasn't professional. It was the look she used to give me when we were first falling in love. That look wasn't mine anymore. Around 8 p.m. I couldn't take it. I needed to confront her. So I left my room, marched down the hall, and found theirs. The door had the same brass numbers as mine, only 2 floors higher. I stood there for what felt like hours, my hand hovering over the wood, my chest tight with adrenaline. Finally, I knocked. The seconds that followed stretched like an eternity. Muffled voices inside, the sound of footsteps, and then the door cracked open, revealing Sam in a silk camisole, her cheeks flushed. The look on her face when she saw me. God, I'll never forget it. Pure shock. Her eyes went wide, her lips parted, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then a male voice from behind her called out, "Babe, who is it?" That word, babe, hit me like a hammer. I wanted to scream, to shove past her, to drag this Michael guy into the hallway and demand he face me like a man. But instead I whispered, barely audible even to myself, "Why?" Sam stammered something, excuses spilling out like broken glass. I couldn't process the words. My vision tunneled, my ears rang. And then he appeared behind her, shirt half buttoned, looking at me with mild annoyance, like I was some intruder ruining his evening. I don't remember everything I said. It was a blur of anger, heartbreak, and desperation. Words like betrayal, lies, and 3 years flew out of my mouth. Sam cried, reaching for me, insisting. It wasn't what it looked like, even though it was exactly what it looked like. Michael stood there, arms crossed, smirking like this was beneath him. The confrontation ended with me walking away, my body trembling so violently I could barely keep upright. I don't even remember the elevator ride down, just the crushing weight in my chest, the tears blurring the lobby lights, the sound of my own sobs echoing off the empty hallway. That night, I drove back to Charlotte in silence. The mountains loomed in the rearview mirror, dark and cold. My phone buzzed with messages from Sam, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, and all I could think was how quickly life can pivot from everything you thought you knew to absolute chaos. By the time I stumbled into my apartment at 3 a.m., I was hollow. The man who had left Charlotte that morning, full of hope for a romantic weekend, no longer existed. In his place was someone broken, raw, and lost. That was the breaking point. The moment I could no longer pretend. The truth was out, and it had destroyed everything I thought I had. But what I didn't realize then was that this was just the beginning of the storm. The fallout would be messier, darker, and far more painful than I could have imagined. When I think back to those first weeks after Asheville, it feels like watching a movie of someone else's life. Fuzzy, disjointed scenes, none of them making much sense. I was there, living it. But it felt like I'd been hollowed out and replaced with a stranger. I wasn't Dan anymore. Not the version of me who believed in Sam, who believed in us. That version died in that hotel hallway. What was left was someone who drifted from day to day, barely keeping it together. The drive home that night had been brutal enough, but waking up the next morning was worse. For one brief blissful second I forgot. My body went through its routine. I stretched, reached for my phone, blinked at the sunlight filtering through the blinds, and then it hit me, like a physical blow. The memory came rushing back and my stomach clenched. The image of Sam's face, the sound of that man's voice calling her babe, the way she looked at him like I didn't exist. It crushed me all over again. My phone was filled with her messages, some apologetic, some defensive, some desperate. A string of missed calls. She'd even left a voicemail, her voice trembling, begging me to talk to her, saying, "It wasn't like that. I still love you. Please, Dan, don't do this." At first, I ignored it all. I couldn't bring myself to hear her voice. But after 2 days, my resolve cracked. I listened to the voicemail. It didn't bring me clarity or peace. It just broke me all over again. hearing her sound so familiar yet so foreign at the same time. I wanted to scream at her, demand she explain every second of those 3 years we shared. But I didn't. Instead, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering how I had been so blind. Work became unbearable. I'd log into Zoom meetings, plaster on a fake smile, and nod through presentations I barely heard. My coworkers probably thought I was just burned out, and maybe in some way I was. I'd get home at night, collapse onto the couch, and stare at the TV without really watching anything. The world moved around me, but I was stuck in that Asheville lobby, reliving the moment over and over like a punishment I couldn't escape. I stopped eating properly. Coffee in the morning, maybe a slice of pizza or a bag of chips at night if I remembered. My jeans started to hang looser, my face grew hollow. Friends noticed, though I tried to avoid them. The last thing I wanted was to sit in a bar while they asked, "So how's Sam?" But avoiding them only lasted so long. About a week after everything went down, my best friend Mark showed up at my apartment unannounced. He'd been my friend since college. Loud, sarcastic, the kind of guy who could smell bullshit from a mile away. He took one look at me, unkempt, red-eyed, empty beer bottles littering the coffee table, and didn't even need me to explain. I remember how he just sat beside me, not pushing, not prying, until I finally cracked. The words spilled out, everything from the email to the hotel to the confrontation. Saying it out loud was like ripping the scab off a wound, but at the same time, it was the first time I felt less alone. Mark didn't sugarcoat it. He said what I couldn't bear to, that she'd been cheating, that I'd been lied to for God knows how long. And as brutal as it was, I needed to hear it. Family was harder. My mom adored Sam. She used to say she was the daughter she never had. Telling her what happened felt like killing that dream for her too. I called one night, voice shaking, and explained. She cried. Cried for me. Cried for the betrayal. Cried for the loss of the life we'd all pictured. She tried to comfort me, but even through the phone I could hear the cracks in her own heart. Nights were the worst. Alone in the apartment we had shared, her absence was suffocating. I'd reach for her out of habit, only to find the other side of the bed cold and empty. The silence pressed in on me until I'd put on music just to fill the void. I started drinking more than I should have, convincing myself a couple of beers would help me sleep. They didn't. And then came the social media spiral. God, that was brutal. Late at night, I'd scroll through her Instagram, staring at photos we'd taken together, dissecting every smile. I'd see her comments on other people's posts, wonder if any of them were coded messages to him. Sometimes I'd find myself on his page, Michael's. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Pictures of expensive dinners, golf outings, vacations. The kind of life I couldn't compete with. And every now and then, there she'd be. Not in obvious couple shots, but in the background, tagged by mutual friends, sitting beside him at a dinner table, her hand resting on his arm like it belonged there. It gutted me. Not just because she had cheated, but because it made me question everything about myself. Was I not enough? Was I boring? Too average? Too safe? Had I wasted 3 years giving my whole heart to someone who had already checked out? That's the thing about betrayal. It isn't just about them. It turns inward, infects every part of you until you don't just mistrust them. You mistrust yourself. I couldn't look in the mirror without hearing that voice in my head. You should have seen this coming. You should have known. There were moments, dark, quiet moments, when I wondered if I'd ever feel normal again. Driving home late from work one night, the thought crossed my mind. What if I just kept going, didn't stop? Let the road take me somewhere far away from all of this. It scared me how tempting it sounded. But then there were small anchors. Mark checking in daily, even if just with a meme to make me laugh. My sister sending me care packages, little notes reminding me I was loved. Even my boss, who gave me lighter projects for a while without making a big deal out of it. Those little gestures kept me tethered when I felt like drifting away. Sam, meanwhile, didn't stop reaching out. She sent long texts, paragraphs begging me to talk, insisting Michael wasn't what I thought. She swore she had still loved me, that it was complicated, that she had made a mistake. Some nights, I'd type out responses in anger, pouring every ounce of rage into my phone, only to delete them before hitting send. Other nights, I'd find myself rereading her old texts, wondering if maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth. But deep down, I knew there was no going back. Even if she was sorry, even if she swore it was over with him, the trust was gone. And once trust shatters, it never returns the same. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, I began to piece myself together. Not in some grand cinematic way, more like patchwork. I started running again, pounding the pavement until the exhaustion drowned out the thoughts. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned, like sketching in coffee shops, I forced myself to accept invitations from friends, even when I wanted to stay home and wallow. But the healing wasn't linear. Some days I'd feel almost normal, laughing with coworkers, thinking maybe I was finally moving on. And then I'd pass a woman with auburn hair on the street, or smell her perfume in a store, and the wound would rip open again. The fallout wasn't just emotional, it was practical too. We'd lived together, shared bills, shared furniture. Dividing our lives was messy. She came by once, with Mark there as a buffer, to pick up her things. The sight of her standing in our apartment again, looking around like it was both familiar and foreign, nearly broke me. She cried. I didn't, not then. I couldn't give her that satisfaction. By the end of 2022, nearly a year after Asheville, I thought I had survived the worst. I wasn't healed, not completely, but I was functioning. I could talk about it without choking up. Could laugh again. Could imagine a future that didn't involve her. But the truth is, betrayal leaves scars that never fully fade. You can rebuild, you can move forward, but part of you always remembers the breaking. And I wasn't done with the story yet. Because as much as I wanted to forget, life had a way of pulling me back into it. The turning point came unexpectedly, months later, when I realized I wasn't just going to sit in the wreckage anymore. Something in me shifted. The pain didn't vanish, but it hardened into resolve. If Sam had rewritten the story of our lives without me, I was damn sure going to write my own ending, one where I wasn't the victim. That's when the idea of taking control, of turning the tables, began to form. I didn't know when exactly it happened, that shift from numbness to action. I only knew one morning, sitting at my tiny kitchen table with the sun creeping through the blinds, that I was done being the wounded, broken version of myself. The person Sam had left behind, the one who spent nights obsessing over texts and Instagram posts, was no longer going to run the show. Something inside me snapped, and it wasn't about revenge at first. It was about reclaiming myself, my pride, my life. I started small. I deleted her number from my phone, blocked her on social media, and removed all reminders of her from my apartment. Every photograph of us, every ticket stub from a concert or movie, every little memento was either thrown away or tucked into a box I shoved into the closet. I couldn't look at them anymore without seeing the betrayal, and I didn't want to. The emotional weight of those objects had become unbearable. Next, I focused on myself. I picked up running again, not as a distraction, but as a ritual. Early mornings, dark streets, the smell of wet pavement in November, my breath steaming in the cold air. I felt my lungs burn, my legs ache, and for the first time in months, I felt alive again. It wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional. Each mile was a tiny act of reclaiming myself from the shadow Sam had cast over my life. Work became my second battlefield. I threw myself into projects I had once considered mundane. Designs that were supposed to be simple ads became something more. I experimented with layouts, fonts, and colors in ways I never had before. The office noticed. My boss called me into his office one afternoon, a smile on his face, and said, "Dan, I don't know what's in your coffee lately, but keep it coming. Your work's never been sharper." I laughed, but inside I felt a flicker of pride. That pride was mine. Sam couldn't touch it. And then came the bigger moves, the ones that were about more than just healing. It was around early 2023 when I learned that Michael, the man who had stolen the weekend I had meticulously planned, had a reputation in Charlotte. Through casual conversations with coworkers and friends, I found out he'd been known for flaunting relationships, breaking hearts, and living life like it was a game. Knowing that didn't make the betrayal sting any less, but it gave me perspective. This wasn't just about Sam. It was about recognizing the kind of people I was better off leaving behind. I started reaching out to my support network more. I reconnected with old friends I'd let drift away during my relationship. Friday nights no longer felt like a reminder of absence, but a canvas for connection. I took up hobbies I had abandoned, like painting and hiking, filling my life with experiences rather than memories of her. I began documenting my days, journaling late at night about anger, grief, and small victories. Each word I wrote became a brick in the wall I was rebuilding around myself, a protective, resilient wall. Still, there were moments of moral conflict. I won't lie and say I never thought about contacting her, confronting her, or even trying to make Michael uncomfortable the way he had made me feel. There was a dark part of me that wanted to see them embarrassed, exposed, maybe even regretful. But each time I approached that edge, I paused. I realized that vengeance would only tether me to the past, keep me circling the same toxic emotions. True victory, I realized, wasn't punishing them. It was living my life better than they could ever imagine. So I decided to flip the narrative. If they wanted a story of lies and betrayal, I'd write one of growth and triumph. I signed up for a weekend art workshop in Asheville. The same city, the same mountains, but a completely different experience. I went alone, and walking through the same streets where I had once felt hollow, seeing the same hotels and cafes, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and liberation. I cried in my car that morning, yes, but for the first time it wasn't about anger or loss. It was about acknowledging my own pain and letting it go. Professionally, I took risks I had been avoiding. I pitched bold, creative campaigns that could have failed, but didn't. And when they succeeded, the recognition I received felt personal. Almost like a vindication, not against Sam or Michael, but against the version of me that had been so passive, so willing to be a victim. I even dipped my toes into the dating world again, slowly, cautiously. Not because I was ready for a new relationship, but because I needed to remind myself that I could be desired, that I could connect, that life wasn't over. The first coffee date I went on, a woman named Claire who worked in publishing. I was nervous. My heart beat fast. My hands trembled as I held the cup. But we talked and laughed. And for the first time in months, I felt a spark of something other than despair. Not love, not yet. Just possibility. One evening, around 6 months after the Asheville incident, I found myself scrolling through social media and noticed something strange. Sam had posted a story, another weekend getaway, another picture with Michael, smiling like they had never existed in the same universe I had occupied. My first instinct was to feel anger, but instead, I felt a quiet sense of detachment. She was living her life, and I was living mine. Her happiness, or her attempts at it, was no longer my burden. I started reflecting more intentionally. I journaled about what I had learned from this, about trust, self-respect, and boundaries. I realized that the breaking point had forced me to confront the parts of myself I had ignored. My complacency, my fear of conflict, my willingness to accept half-truths. Those months of grief and rage had been painful, yes, but they had also been transformative. I wasn't the same man who had walked into the Pines Hotel that night. I was stronger, sharper, and more self-aware. It wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't expose them, didn't confront them publicly, didn't try to humiliate them. Instead, I focused on building a life that made the betrayal irrelevant. My happiness became my statement. My growth became my retaliation. And the more I invested in myself, the smaller their presence became in my world. By the end of the year, I had even started exploring new creative avenues professionally. I pitched an idea for a personal project, a graphic novel inspired by experiences of betrayal and resilience. Writing it, designing it, pouring my own journey into it was cathartic. Every page was a confrontation with my past, every sketch a reclaiming of my narrative. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. And somewhere in there, I realized that turning the tables wasn't about proving anything to Sam or Michael. It was about proving to myself that I was more than the sum of my heartbreak, that I could feel pain, face it, and emerge on the other side with dignity intact. That life could still be beautiful, even after betrayal. Looking back now, I can see the parallels between those mountains in Asheville and the emotional terrain I had to climb. Both were steep, both demanded effort, both offered breathtaking views at the top. The climb hurt. It exhausted me, but the summit, the place where I could breathe fully again, was worth every step. And so, I kept climbing. Not out of vengeance, not out of spite, but out of a refusal to let my life be defined by someone else's actions. That determination became the turning point, the moment I reclaimed control. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, relentless, and profoundly personal. By the time 2024 rolled around, I could talk about Sam without shaking, without feeling the need to relive every moment of that betrayal. I could go to Asheville and smile at the mountains, remembering the pain but also the strength I had gained. I had taken back my life in ways she could never touch, and I understood, finally, that the best way to turn the tables wasn't to fight them. It was to outlive them, to outgrow the version of me that had been trapped by their deceit. The breaking point had been horrific, but the aftermath had taught me something invaluable. Resilience isn't about ignoring pain. It's about using it to rebuild yourself stronger than before. And in that rebuilding, I had found a power I didn't know I possessed. I was no longer just the boy betrayed. I was Dan, the man who had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, and had turned it into something that could never be taken away again. The months following my Asheville reckoning weren't just about reclaiming myself. They were about redefining who I was, what I wanted, and how I would allow myself to be treated in the future. I realized that betrayal doesn't just hurt, it teaches. It exposes the cracks in your foundation. the parts of yourself you've ignored or compromised. And if you survive it, you can rebuild in a way that's stronger, wiser, and almost unrecognizable to the person you were before. By the spring of 2024, I had fully moved out of the apartment Sam and I had shared. I found a modest loft downtown, a place with exposed brick and big windows that let in sunlight at just the right angles. I decorated it myself, carefully choosing pieces that spoke to me rather than our shared tastes. No reminders of her lingered, no photographs, no traces, no residue of the life we had imagined together. For the first time in years, I felt fully in control of my environment, my narrative, my existence. I also began traveling more intentionally. Solo trips became my form of therapy. I revisited Asheville once, not to wallow, but to hike the Blue Ridge trails and immerse myself in the clarity that nature offered. I booked a small cabin outside the city, surrounded by pine and oak, where the air smelled like rain and earth. Each morning I woke to mist curling around the mountains, and I realized that the serenity I craved wasn't dependent on anyone else. It had been there all along. I just had to step into it. At work, I started taking bigger risks. I pitched campaigns I had been hesitant about, entered design contests, and even started mentoring junior designers. Sharing what I had learned, both professionally and emotionally, gave me purpose. The younger designers would come to me for advice, and I found myself giving not just career guidance, but life lessons too. I told them, without explicitly referencing my own heartbreak, that failure and betrayal are part of the process, and the measure of a person is how they respond, how they reclaim their power afterward. Then came a surprising twist, a moment I never anticipated. One evening, I received an email from Sam. I didn't open it immediately. Something in me wanted to leave the past buried, to let the story end where it had. But curiosity and a lingering sense of closure pushed me to read it. She apologized, again, yes, but this time without excuses or justifications. She admitted that she had made a terrible mistake, that Michael wasn't what she thought, and that she had realized too late the depth of what she had lost. She wished me well, sincerely, and hoped I had found happiness. I felt a strange mix of emotions reading that email. Part of me wanted to scoff, to throw my phone across the room. Another part of me felt a flicker of pity for her, for the choices she had made, for the life she had built on deception. But mostly I felt free. Free because I no longer needed her acknowledgement or her apology to validate my journey. My life had moved forward without her, and that alone was the resolution I had been searching for. Around that same time, Claire, the woman I had met on that cautious first coffee date, became more than just a comforting presence. Not a replacement, never a band-aid, but a companion who reminded me that human connection could be real, untainted by deceit. We traveled together, explored art galleries, and sat in cafes talking about everything and nothing. The laughter was lighter, the intimacy slower, and the trust deliberate. In her, I found not the thrill of obsession, but the stability of mutual respect and understanding. Professionally, my graphic novel project came to fruition. I poured my experiences into it, transforming the raw, painful narrative of betrayal into a story of resilience and self-discovery. I shared it at a local arts festival, and the reception was overwhelming. People approached me afterward, saying they saw themselves in the pages, that the pain mirrored their own lives. I realized then that my personal journey, once so isolating, had become a beacon for others navigating heartbreak. The betrayal that had once threatened to define me had now become a tool to inspire, to connect, to heal. By midsummer, I could even drive past Asheville without that tight knot of anxiety forming in my chest. I passed the same streets, the same hotels, the same cafes where my heartbreak had felt endless, and instead of sinking into despair, I smiled, not because I had forgotten, but because I had survived. I had grown. I had won. Not in some petty, vengeful way, but in the quiet, unshakable way of a life reclaimed. There were moments, of course, when memories would surface unbidden. A scent that reminded me of her perfume, a song we had once listened to, or the sight of a couple laughing in a way I remembered sharing with her. But each time, I realized that those moments no longer held power over me. They were echoes, shadows of a past self, and while they could stir pain, they could not define the present. The final closure, the emotional punctuation mark on the story, came in a most unexpected way. One evening, I was walking through an art gallery in Charlotte, attending a friend's exhibit, when I overheard a conversation. Two women were discussing someone named Samantha Rhodes and Michael. Gossip, fleeting, careless. And I realized that my old life, the one tied to Sam and her betrayals, was someone else's anecdote now. It no longer mattered. Their story was theirs, and mine was mine. In that instant, I understood the full arc of the journey. Betrayal had stripped me down to my raw core, yes, but it had also forced me to rebuild. Every choice I had made since that Asheville weekend, from leaving the apartment to traveling alone to immersing myself in work and art, had been a reclamation of agency. I hadn't just survived the heartbreak, I had transformed it. Looking back, it's almost ironic. The pain that had once seemed insurmountable, the heartbreak that had left me questioning my worth, had become the very engine of my growth. I was stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the value of truth and authenticity in both myself and others. Betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a catalyst, a force that pushed me into a version of life I might never have sought otherwise. I often think about Sam, about the choices she made, and about Michael. I don't hate them anymore. I don't fantasize about revenge or expose their lives on social media. That version of me, angry, vengeful, consumed by hurt, has been buried. Instead, I feel a quiet compassion, the kind you develop after walking through fire. Not for them, exactly, but for the human capacity to make mistakes, to hurt, to falter, and to sometimes, ultimately, face the consequences of those choices indirectly through the resilience of those they've wronged. As for me, I continue building. I continue climbing, step by step, day by day. I keep traveling, creating, and loving cautiously but fully. I've learned that life doesn't pause for heartbreak, but it does reward those who navigate it with courage and integrity. And sometimes the best revenge, the truest resolution, is living a life so full and so authentic that the past loses all power over you. I still think about that Asheville morning, about the email, about the lobby, about the moment I first saw them together. But I don't relive it to torment myself anymore. I relive it as a reminder that even in the darkest, most gut-wrenching moments, we have a choice: to stay broken or to rise, to let betrayal define us, or to redefine ourselves in ways even the cruelest twists of fate cannot touch. And I rose. The scars remain, faint but permanent, reminders of what was endured. But they aren't a mark of weakness. They're proof of survival, proof that a life can continue, can flourish, and can even become beautiful again after the deepest betrayal. I am no longer the man who booked a surprise weekend getaway, only to find the love of his life with someone else. I am Dan, the man who faced the unimaginable, stared it in the face, and walked away not just whole, but stronger, wiser, and unshakably alive. And in the end, that's the resolution I had been searching for all along. Not vindication, not revenge, not apologies. Just life, mine, fully lived, reclaimed from the wreckage,